Hey, this is Lady C.
Hey, this is JT.
Welcome to another episode of The Critical Thought.
You're listening to The Critical Thought, where we challenge our listeners to use critical thinking when examining the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Now, you know, it's a specific time of the year. What is it, JT?
This is the time for the service report.
That's right. And we have some findings that we want to share with you.
That's right. We're going to take a look back down memory lane. And what we mean by that is we're going to look at for some very specific numbers inside the service report. Of course, as with many businesses, because of the pandemic, their numbers are down. And as we've always said, Watchtower is a business. And so really, it's not too much surprising to see that the Watchtower numbers are definitely down this year. But, we wanted to take a look at the numbers because they tell a very interesting story. In our last video, we discussed a very interesting little subject that was shared with me when I was taking my statistics class, where the professor made the statement. He says, numbers don't lie, but you can lie with numbers. And we wanted to show you, looking back on a historical timeline, how the society over the years has literally taken numbers and lied.
And what's interesting about this number, JT, it's every year when we received the yearbook, we were looking for specific numbers as it related to, the anointed and how many people were actually partaking. And I remember how excited we were to receive the yearbook and go grab that number to see what it was, because we knew what that meant. In fact, did you have your bags packed? Because it was almost time for the tribulation.
Yeah, they would use the numbers all the time. And so one of the things that we did is we showed our Bible studies from the platform in field service that this number had meaning to it. In fact, I want to show you exactly what the society said that this number represented. That is the number of the anointed partaking. So let's take a look and see what the January 15, 2000 Watchtower said about the role that this number that was being reported in the yearbook represented.
Okay, so according to the January 15, 2000 Watchtower, under the subheading 6 Convincing Lines of Evidence that we are in the last days, the sixth one is the number of genuine anointed disciples of Christ is dwindling, though some will evidently still be on earth when the Great Tribulation begins. Most of the remnant are quite elderly, and over the years of the number of those who are truly anointed has been getting smaller. And according to the 1981 Jehovah's Witness Yearbook, page 31, it says, over the past 7 years, from 1974 to 1980 inclusive, Jehovah's Witnesses have made steady progress. Their growth is healthy. Only as to memorial partakers has there been a gradual decline, which is in accord with scriptural expectations.
Did you catch that? The Watchtower had us out there teaching people in their homes, standing on platforms, teaching them that the reducing or the dwindling of the number that was reported in the yearbook was one of the evidence, one of the signs that we're living deep in the last days. The Watchtower loves to use the word evidence in irrefutable facts. But these are not facts. These are not evidence. Evidence is something that people can look at and see for themselves. And that's what we would do. We would take the evidence that was in the yearbook and we would look at it. We would show it to others. And so we presented this to our neighbors. And we told people this until the day that the numbers stopped going down. And then the numbers started to rise. And I want you to take a look at this timeline, because this really shows you what happens when you take a number and you literally build a teaching that is a lie. the wheels will fall off. Look at this timeline. The numbers are supposed to be going down. Instead, they're going up. From 8,000 to over 21,000 people are partaking. At this rate, they're going to have 144,000 right here on earth partaking. So now that the numbers have started to rise, the organization now needed to come out with an explanation, because they've told people for decades, this is an evidence, this is a proof. Wheels fell off. So then the Watchtower gets into the process of coming up with an excuse. It's very much like our parents told us when we was growing up as kids. If you tell a lie and you don't tell the truth, that means you're going to have to tell another lie to cover up the first lie. And that's what the Watchtower started doing all over again. Now let's take a look at the Watchtower and look at the excuses, the explanations that the Watchtower now has to create to cover over this lie, that somehow these numbers in this yearbook had something to do with living in the last days.
Okay, so we're going to take a look at several quotes discussing the anointed and individuals partaking of the emblems. First of all, we're going to talk about the August 15th, 1996 Watchtower and their response to the anointed taking of the emblems. Take a listen to what they say. Over the years, some, even ones newly baptized, have suddenly begun to partake. In a number of cases, after a while, they acknowledged that this was an error. Some have recognized that they partook as an emotional response to perhaps physical or mental strain. That was the August 15th, 1996 Watchtower.
So when the organization began to see an uptick in the numbers, all of a sudden they began to change the story. They began to say that, oh, well, these numbers are rising because people who just got baptized, they became emotional. They saw the bread and wine coming by and they just reached out and snatched it because they thought they was going to heaven. So now the organization is trying to explain away these numbers that are increasing. But that doesn't stop. They continue on. At this point, people were just emotional, excited. Now, notice what the organization says.
The next quote that we're going to consider is one where previous President Frederick Franz was speaking to the Gilead class in 1970. And according to the February 1st, 1999 Watchtower, note what he says. Now he starts off by saying, no more additions. Who then are the newly associated ones who are partaking of the memorial emblems? If they are of the remnant, they are replacements, because these were taken care of back in the 1930s. So no more new additions. That's what he's saying.
So now the organization is saying, well, the reason we're seeing these people is because they're just merely replacements. They're just replacing the anointed who became unfaithful. And, I was always wondering about that because it made no sense. You have people who are supposed to be of the anointed, and they're 80, 90 years old, and all of a sudden now Sister Johnson wants to go and see the Chippendales. Why would anybody who's of the anointed, almost at their death, all of a sudden decide, I don't want to go to heaven now, and go out and do something foolish? But more importantly, think about this. If you had a basketball team and someone was injured and you pulled in a replacement, would the number of people on the court go up? No. If someone came in as a replacement, you don't get 6 players, you still have 5. So these are the type of excuses now that these numbers are starting to go up. And clearly, it is no longer an evidence, as they said, that we're living in the last days, that the end is right around the corner. So now you can't show these numbers to your coworkers. You can't show these numbers to your next door neighbors and say, see here, this is one of the signs that the Bible said, because now the numbers are going up. But the society then goes for the juggler. I mean, this next reason just takes it all the way off the chart. Listen to this.
And now, the third quote that we're going to consider comes from the August 15th, 2011 Watchtower, and note what it has to say. A number of factors, including past religious beliefs or even mental or emotional imbalance, might cause some to assume mistakenly that they have the heavenly calling. We thus have no way of knowing the exact number of anointed ones on earth, nor do we need to know. Now, that was according to the August 15th, 2011 Watchtower.
Can you believe that? When I was coming up as a kid, we had great respect for the anointed, the brothers of Christ. It's very sad now that we see how the Watchtower literally denigrates those who partake. They refer to these ones as being mentally, emotionally unbalanced. In other words, they're crazy. Now, this does raise a very interesting question, though. And it just goes to show how when you start applying critical thinking questions to the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses, they will not hold up. You see, basically now the Watchtower is teaching that God would not be calling anyone to heaven who may struggle with emotional issues. Can you believe that? The arrogance of the organization to say that if a person has emotional issues that he or she is struggling with, they're unfit to be called to heaven. Now, this is interesting because the organization says that persons who may have lost a limb, may have lost their sight, God can call them to heaven. But if a person is struggling with emotional needs, according to the Watchtower, God is not calling them. And so what we're seeing is what happens when you have to come up with excuses for the changing numbers. This chart, it speaks for itself. The entire concept of counting the anointed is ridiculous. Now a witness will tell you, if you ask him about the numbers, he'll simply say, well, it doesn't really represent all of those of the anointed. Now that's interesting. You see, organizations and companies, they release annual reports every year. Lots of organizations do. Who in the world would put a number into their yearbook, into their annual report that they know is bogus? They're calling these fraud anointed, bogus anointed. So what is the point of putting in your annual book, your annual report, a number that you know is bogus? You see, the Watchtower plays the number game. They will say anything to make sure that they can continue to do what they always do. They want to try to come out always smelling like a rose.
Well, you know, JT, it never ceases to amaze me.
Never stops, never stops.
Every time something goes down in this religion, we can always find a loophole, crazy statistics. You know, we can always go and find contradictions, and the list just goes on and on. And this is the reason why, as critical thinkers, we like to point out these various things to individuals, because you can go back through all of their literature and prove that they're liars.
Yeah, that is so true. And it's very important to just keep in mind this is what critical thinking is all about. That's what got all of us. We never stopped to think critically. We had what was presented to us as a number. And this number had significant, as the Watchtower said, this had significant Bible importance because the number's going down. And then when the number starts going back up, they now have just had all the wheels fall off. And so this is why we encourage people all the time. Take the time, do your research, dig in it. And one of the most important things is when it comes to their teachings, you got to put it on a timeline. And when you put things on a timeline when it comes to this organization, what you will see is constantly, old Father Time literally destroys teachings of the Watchtower every single time. Give it enough time, the wheels will fall off every time.
That's right. That's right. Well, so this has been Lady C.
This has been JT.
And we want to thank you for being in our audience. And we'll see you on the next video.
Take care.
This program was sponsored by Critical Thinkers.